All right, so if you're wondering what is the nasty looking food in the thumbnail pic for this video, it is actually school food which is fed to some American kids in schools, okay? It looks so nasty that a friend of mine thought it was prison food, but they actually feed kids that. And you might not find that appealing, but what happens if you really like something like this chocolate muffin which looks really tasty, or if you really like pizza and you want to lose weight or you want to get healthy again, but you're struggling to actually adhere to a healthy diet and you really enjoy eating unhealthy foods. Okay, so a friend of mine said, "Hi mate, quick question. Your keto diet, how do you make it sustainable? Do you have weekly or monthly cheat dates? I have similar skin eczema issues and sure it's due to my love of carbs and occasional processed foods." Okay, so what he's talking about there is basically last year, a friend of mine told me to try out a carnivore diet, which is basically all meat and eggs. And I had psoriasis on my finger for over 20 years. I used to have to put steroid creams on it. And within 3 weeks of eating that diet, my psoriasis went away. And psoriasis and eczema are actually very similar skin issues, okay? Psoriasis is an autoimmune issue and eczema is from inflammation. And it turns out that a lot of people who go on the carnivore diet will fix their skin issues because it is down to inflammation. And basically the sugar, the carbohydrates, the seed oils, which is used in processed foods such as canola oil, and also pesticides and herbicides in plants, is basically causing low-grade inflammation in a lot of people. And for me, as soon as I cut out the processed foods and really cut out my carbohydrate intake, my psoriasis went away. And my friend wants to do the same for his eczema, but he's obviously having difficulty in making his diet completely, healthy. And there is no easy way around it, right? So I'm going to give you the hard truth about how to adhere to a healthy diet. If it was simple, then everyone will be able to eat very healthy and there will be no fat people, there will be no unhealthy people as a result of their diet. So first off, you really need to know why processed foods and high sugary foods are addictive in the first place, okay? So back in the 1980s, the cigarette companies Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds took over 3 of the major food companies, okay? General Mills, Nabisco, and Kraft. And then they moved their scientists over to those food companies to try and make the products as addictive as possible to then boost sales, okay? It was the biggest mergers in the 1980s, which weren't oil companies. And as a result, it sparked off a global competition within food companies to make their products as addictive as possible. And one of the main ingredients that they use will be sugar, although they also add in a bunch of chemicals such as flavorings to make their foods taste not only good, but will actually hijack the brain and make a person addicted. Okay, so if you look at this photo, it is a PET scan, and you can Google this. On Google Images, go to PET scan sugar cocaine, and sugar will light up the brain brighter than cocaine. And the way it does it is basically when you consume sugar, it causes dopamine release. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter that nature has designed to reward an animal and create pleasure, to try to incentivize an animal to pursue certain behaviors. So for example, if you have sex and have an orgasm, it will cause dopamine release, and that causes animals to want to pursue having sex so that then they can procreate. And dopamine is also released whenever people consume sugars, because in nature, sugar is actually relatively rare. Okay, you only get it in things like honey or in fruits. And nature is trying to get basically our ancestors to eat sugary stuff so then they can put on body fat so that they are more likely to survive, say, a famine or through winter periods of low food. All right, it is not like now where we try to avoid getting fat. But companies, and not just food companies, know this, so they create products which deliberately target the dopamine system and cause a dopamine release. And this is not just food, it is alcohol, it is tobacco. Okay, every time somebody smokes a cigarette and they get a nicotine hit, they will get a dopamine hit. And even computer gaming, every time somebody wins a game, they will get a dopamine hit, and even social media, whenever somebody gets a like, they'll get a small dopamine hit. So it gets very addictive, and it explains why it drives a lot of behavior in people. Now, if you look at this chart of dopamine, basically the problem is that after a dopamine spike, it will go below baseline. Okay, so somebody who gets a dopamine hit will feel bad when they're no longer getting the hit. And it drives the behavior of addiction because it will cause the person to try and get the hit again. And the thing is, with getting long-term hits, is that it will start to trigger what is shown in this chart, although it has nothing to do with Newton's third law of physics. You get a hit, and then you go below baseline. And then every future hit, you start going lower and lower below baseline. And that's what basically happens to a lot of people who take drugs, is that at the beginning, they get an amazing high from getting a hit from dopamine, but then they start going further and further below baseline. So then they start chasing more hits just to feel normal again because they're feeling really crap. And that's what happens with people who eat processed foods, okay? They are actually below baseline most of the time if they consume processed foods on a regular basis. And the same with smokers. And so they're going to want to consume the product again because they just feel crap when they don't have the product. And that's how addiction is built. And first of all, I am not judging anybody when I say this. Okay, so what I'm about to say next will turn off some people, but it's the hard truth. So if you don't like what I'm going to say, you're just going to switch the video off. But if you like it, if it helps you to actually stick to a healthy diet, then like the video and subscribe to the channel, okay? So over the years, I have been more of an addict than anyone else I know, okay? Maybe not, like I know a lot of friends who are pretty addicted to stuff. But anyway, I was a binge drinker in my 20s, and I was a smoker for over 20 years, and I love processed foods, and I used to play computer games from morning until nighttime. So I was very, very addicted to my dopamine, okay? And the problem with feeling this crappy feeling when you're below baseline with your dopamine is that it starts to hijack your brain, and then you think you're making conscious decisions on your consumer choice, but you're not, because you're just trying to avoid the crappy feeling when you're not getting the product that's giving you the dopamine hit. So when I used to want to quit smoking, then I would go to a convenience store, buy a pack of cigarettes, and give myself the excuse of saying that I was just gonna have 2 or 3 cigarettes. And then I would smoke 2 or 3, and then I will say to myself, well, you've bought this whole pack. Now, if you don't smoke the rest, then you're just kind of wasting your money. So then I will end up smoking the rest. And then after a while, I just feel crap again because I'm below baseline, and I'll buy another pack of cigarettes. And I'll just repeat the process over and over again. And people who really like processed foods, they're doing exactly the same thing, okay? They're finding justification for their addiction. They might not even know they're addicted until they really want to quit and start having a healthy diet, all right? So for example, a friend of mine, I told my friend how dangerous processed foods are, way more dangerous than people really assume because of the ingredients that are in the processed foods, which is driving up chronic disease rates across the board for many, many diseases, is even upping up cancer rates. And my dear friend just told me to stop fear-mongering. And I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that that friend really liked eating processed foods. So they don't want to feel like guilt over or fear over what they are consuming, okay? And that is the last thing you want to do if you actually want to quit something. You don't want to give yourself justifications. You want to give yourself the hard truth. And you want to give yourself the guilt trip if it gives you guilt, because it is a negative feeling, and if you get it long enough, it really helps you to actually quit that behavior, okay? So there is no easy way out, but I can tell you this, when it comes to addictive behaviors, all you have to do is stop doing it for about 2 to 3 weeks, okay, and then your dopamine level will normalize and you get to back to the baseline level, and then you will no longer feel like you really need an addictive substance just to avoid that crappy feeling. The problem is that most people who are addicted to something, they can't even do 2 weeks without that thing. So then when they consume it again, they get the dopamine hit, but then they go even further below baseline. So just keep on having a vicious circle of repeating the entire process. So when my friend asked me, basically he wants to fix this eczema issue, but he wants to consume the processed foods as well. And the carbohydrates is probably causing him problems as well, but he still wants to have the pasta with his family. I'm sorry, but he just cannot, both do this thing that's causing him problems and cure his eczema, okay, or get significant weight loss. You just have to cut it out. Or think of it this way: if it wasn't just something that society thinks is by now normal, like processed foods, ultra processed foods, but like cigarette smoking, people know cigarette smoking is bad, so they avoid it. Now, you wouldn't, if you were a non-smoker, you wouldn't justify the need to go and get your cigarettes. The reason my friend is justifying or wanting to still get us some of that processed food is because he is already addicted, and he probably doesn't even know it, or he doesn't want to think of it in that way, but that is just the actual hard truth. So for anyone who's has an alcohol problem, they just cannot go back to alcohol. If anybody is a smoker, they really can't smoke anymore. And if anybody was really addicted to their processed foods, then they just shouldn't eat processed foods anymore. And it is not just them, it is pretty much the majority of the population. If people found it easy to eat healthy, then people won't be, half the population in the US is, almost half of the population in the US is obese now. And people getting fatter and fatter across Europe and most developed countries. If it was that easy to eat healthy and to avoid the processed foods, then people would do it, okay? But don't give yourself an excuse. It makes it way harder to quit, okay? Saying that, basically my friend said that there were processed foods everywhere. Well, if you go into the supermarket, yes, 70% of the supermarket aisles are now processed food, but you can still go into the 30% of the supermarket aisle and buy whole foods and buy meat and eggs, which are the healthiest foods, all right? So that's the first trick in adhering to a healthy diet, is to understand this mechanism of how dopamine works and how it hijacks your brain, and then when you feel bad because your dopamine is below baseline, then fight it with a better understanding of how it's affecting your brain and your choices, and then it'll be much easier to quit. And that's coming from somebody who had major addictions for most of his life, okay? The second thing you want to do is basically lower the feeling of discomfort when you're trying to eat healthy, okay? Most people who eat processed foods, basically their gut microbiome, so their gut bacteria is all messed up because they're eating so much sugar, and also other ingredients in the processed foods is feeding the unhealthy strains of bacteria in the stomach. And when they try to cut it out, as the bacteria is not being fed, it releases chemicals via the gut-brain axis, and it causes more discomfort, all right? So if you want to cut out processed foods, it really helps to increase the amount of good bacteria in your stomach, and you get that from taking probiotics, and then you want to feed that bacteria, so you can buy prebiotics or eat stuff that's fermented like kimchi, or fermented cheeses like Parmesan cheese or blue cheese. And then as the amount of good bacteria in your stomach increases, then it lowers the amount of discomfort you will feel from that. And also, people who cut out carbohydrates from their diet will feel discomfort because their insulin levels start to decrease. And in fact, and insulin holds on to electrolytes, okay, so stuff like sodium, potassium, etc., and they'll get low levels of that. So they will start to feel discomfort, especially if they exercise, because they have low electrolyte levels. In fact, the opposite of that, the reason why people get high blood pressure is because if they constantly eat carbohydrates, a lot of it, especially sugar, they get insulin spikes all the time. And then when they get very high levels of insulin in their system all the time, it holds onto a lot more electrolytes like sodium. And and when you have a lot more electrolytes in your fluid, then you get high blood pressure. Okay, that's why they recommend not consuming as much sodium, which is not the solution. The actual solution is to lower the amount of insulin in the body. So make sure to get electrolytes, non-carbohydrate electrolytes to put in your water, all right? And the third thing you want to do is basically eat a diet high in fats, okay? Because fats causes more of the satiety hormones to be released, okay? So there are three satiety hormones, okay? There's leptin, there is GLP-1, which is glucagon-like peptide 1, which the weight loss drugs like Ozempic are trying to mimic and cause a person to be satiated and not eat as much food. But the problem with Ozempic is that it has major, and similar weight loss drugs, is that they have major side effects. So they cause thyroid problems, they might have caused problems for the kidney, and they cause a lot more muscle loss, so that the person, as they're losing weight, they're actually losing a lot of muscle at the same time. But the problem is, if they stop taking that drug and they haven't changed their lifestyle and they get their appetite back, they're just going to start overeating again. And by that point, they have a lot less lean muscle mass. So people don't have an Ozempic deficiency, okay? And taking a weight loss drug is not a long-term solution to the problem, okay? They still have to find a way to eat correctly and adhere to a healthy diet long-term. And if you look at this study, and the third hormone is called CCK, okay? And if you look at this study done, basically they found that if you eat fats, out of the macronutrients, there's three, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. If you eat fats, then it causes the most release of GLP-1 and also CCK, which causes more satiety signaling, so you feel full, so you end up eating less, okay? And also heating up food, rather than just having cold food, will cause more, feeling fuller, okay? So you don't want to eat cold food items, such as the tasty muffin or whatever. You want to, get a hot meal. So on the flip side of that, if you look at this mouse, which has a leptin problem, if an animal is no longer responding to the leptin hormone, then they will lose their ability to control their appetite and they'll just keep overeating. And as I mentioned earlier, insulin is a hormone released when blood sugar levels go up, and that is mainly triggered by carbohydrates. If a person is constantly getting blood sugar spikes and their insulin levels keep going up over many, many years, they will start being resistant to their own insulin levels, okay? And if they get insulin resistance high enough, that's called type 2 diabetes, okay? So diabetic is just a person who's very resistant to their own insulin. And the problem with insulin resistance is that it also causes leptin resistance. So a person is no longer responding to their leptin signaling, so they no longer feel full and they end up overeating and eat more and more, okay? So basically, if you want to adhere to a healthy diet, it's very simple. First of all, understand how dopamine works and do not justify your behavior and give yourself excuses. Second of all, fix your gut microbiome and take electrolytes so that you don't feel any negative effects from those factors. And third of all, eat a high fat, preferably animal fat diet, or there are healthy fats from, say, olives or avocados, okay? So this would be like a perfect meal to eat. So it's like steaks and eggs, okay? So I had some onions in there as well. So steaks, eggs, and also avocado. And then obviously people who are on a carnivore diet are not going to eat the onions and avocado. My friend doesn't eat beef, so he could always go for, say, lamb and cheese, okay, such as this meal, or go for a fatty fish like salmon or mackerel are very good because they're high in omega-3 and they're fatty fish, so they're more filling, all right? You do not want to eat really lean meats, although protein is also very good for satiety signaling. It is not as good as fatty meats, okay? So a lot of people think that animal fats are unhealthy. That is not the case, all right? So my advice to my friend who wants to cheat would be, if he can handle it, okay, and it does not drive his behavior to, eating processed foods to come back, and he eats it on a regular basis, then yeah, maybe like once every 2 weeks. He wants to do it more often than that, and I would strongly not suggest that, because if a person really wants to eat, unhealthy stuff on a regular basis, again, that's just a sign that the dopamine has hijacked that person's brain, okay? In the old days, when food was not so plentiful, people used to only have treats, okay? Once in a while, they might have some sugary stuff. It's not like now where people are out of control, and whenever they want to eat sugary or tasty stuff or unhealthy stuff like French fries, they just get access to it all the time. So it really helps to actually limit yourself. If you are disciplined enough to just not consume it at all, if you want to cheat, then very, very infrequently. Or what I do is that on a day-to-day basis, I do not consume any of that stuff. And I basically consume it when I go on holiday. So when I went to Germany, okay, I allow myself to eat unhealthy foods, and I was drinking, all right? When I had my wedding, over a 5-day period, I was drinking and eating what I wanted with my friends, and we had a good time, because I don't want to limit myself to the point where I'm no longer able to just have pleasure, even on holiday or on important occasions, okay? But that should just be a few times a year, all right? And these days, I just don't go out drinking with my friends. I don't allow myself to be in a situation where I am likely to consume unhealthy stuff, unless it is an important occasion, okay? So like last time, a couple of weeks ago, a friend from Israel came into town, and we went out for some drinks and ate food that I would normally not eat. And if a friend was leaving town for good, or if somebody like a really close friend had a birthday, then maybe I'll go and eat some unhealthy stuff. But I wouldn't give myself cheats on a regular basis, okay? So I don't have weekly cheats, okay? On a day-to-day basis, I just adhere to a healthy diet, and I don't give myself excuses. Basically, the hard truth is, if you want to give yourself excuses, then you will find justification, and that is all down to dopamine, all right? If you really wanted to be healthy, then, and that was an important goal to you, then you will easily just avoid processed foods altogether. And I suggest people who follow my channel that they create more discipline in life over time, because you can actually train yourself to be more disciplined and to avoid these harmful processed foods. Because I'll tell you one thing, the neurotransmitter dopamine is for pleasure, okay? And it is not even the same as the neurotransmitter for happiness, which is serotonin, okay? A lot of people don't know this. Pleasure and happiness are not the same thing. Happiness, which is serotonin, comes from relationships with family and friends, and it comes from, setting meaningful goals in life and achieving those goals. That creates serotonin release. It is very different from dopamine release, which is why a lot of people who constantly pursue dopamine hits, a lot of those people are the most unhappy people ever, okay? So at the beginning, they're just enjoying their beers and going out and having fun, but then they end up being addicted to the alcohol or to the drugs or whatever, or they might have an addiction to computer gaming or whatever addiction they have, and they end up being miserable as hell and really unhealthy, okay? So understand that dopamine and serotonin are completely two different things, and that pleasure and happiness are two completely different things. And I hope everyone pursues a lifestyle where they just become more happy over time, all right? And that does involve a bit of work, but if you use the strategies I just outlined in this video, then it makes it a lot easier to adhere to a healthy diet and to cut out the crappy foods which are unhealthy for you. Okay, so do me a favor, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about more about these satiety hormones, which makes people more full over time. All right.